We are only a couple of days away from finally getting some Assassin's Creed Shadows gameplay on June 10th, and since the reveal trailer, we've been getting lots of new details and information on the game from all sorts of different sources, so I figured it would be best to wait and then make a video talking about all the details we've gotten on AC Shadows thus far, rather than making a new video each time something new comes out, because we've been getting new stuff quite frequently. But the first thing I want to talk about is how exactly the dual protagonist system will work in Shadows. Because while we have had a dual protagonist game before in Syndicate, Shadows is going to be quite different, as Ubisoft Quebec has seemingly made changes to how it works in response to some of the Syndicate criticism. For one, we're going to have a lot more agency on which character we want to use. For the most part, we'll almost always be able to choose which character we want to play as, be that main missions, side quests, and of course just roaming about in the open world. The only exception is when there is a character-specific quest, where it wouldn't make sense for the other protagonists to be involved. So obviously each character's intro missions will require you to play as both. Plus, it's important that the game has us play as both characters a fair amount at the beginning of the game, so we can understand how they work and their differences, so we know who we'd prefer to play as for the rest of the missions. I'm thinking there may also be some missions later on in the game where Naoe and Yasuke are separated, and you'll be required to play as one of them. That's just speculation on my part, but I could see that happening. But while I admit, when I first heard this would be a dual protagonist game several months ago now when that was first leaked, I believe, I was very apprehensive about it, because I didn't really like how it was done in Syndicate, and I would have just preferred a singular protagonist. But after hearing about all the differences Naoe and Yasuke will have when it comes to gameplay, the fact we can actually choose largely for the most part who we want to play as, and that each character will have their own unique playstyle and skills, I'm definitely feeling a lot more optimistic about that element of the game now. If done well, like it's being described, I think it could work very well, especially if each character's animations are completely unique to them, so that they actually feel very different to play as well. What's interesting too is that each character will have different dialogue and options during a quest. So playing a side quest, for example as Naoe, will have different dialogue and interactions than if you played it as Yasuke. And that should mean that quests can have different outcomes depending on which character you choose. I'm curious to know how different some quests can play out based on which character you're playing as, because characters and NPCs will react to Naoe and Yasuke differently. So if you're doing a quest for an NPC that may like Yasuke but dislikes Naoe, or vice versa, I'm curious how much of an impact that would actually have on not only dialogue, but the potential outcome of the quest. Because this is a fully fledged RPG, and similar to Odyssey, I'm expecting there to be lots of different choices and potential outcomes even in the side content. And with quests where both characters are present, which I would assume would mostly be the main quests, you'll actually be able to choose in the moment which character you want to respond in dialogue with. So I imagine Yasuke would have a set of dialogue choices, and so would Naoe, that differ from each other to fit their own personalities. Naoe and Yasuke will also have individual skill trees and gear, but they will share XP, collected weapons, and resources, which makes a lot of sense. You don't want to have one character be like level 5, while the other one you put all your time into is like level 50, because then when you're required to play as the other, you'll be extremely underleveled. So it makes sense that XP is shared. Having individual skill trees hopefully will mean more meaningful differences between the two characters. I wonder if skill points will be shared, or if each character gets their own skill points to be spent on their own individual skill trees. I would think they're shared, since XP is shared, but we don't have full clarity on that yet. Obviously, they're not going to be able to share gear, since Naoe and Yasuke are completely different sizes, and Naoe will have the lighter shinobi assassin attire, while Yasuke will have heavy samurai armor. I'm sure there's still different types of looks and armor you can equip for both, but it makes sense why gear will be specific to each character. Thankfully, we got some more details on the combat as well. I've been very curious what exactly it's going to look and feel like. Will it be similar to Odyssey, and how does it look on this new version of the Anvil engine? And I definitely expect it to still be the RPG-style hitbox combat we've had since Origins. We do know that Yasuke and Naoe will also play significantly different when it comes to combat, probably the most notable difference is that Naoe won't be able to block or parry in combat, while Yasuke can. Naoe will be able to deflect attacks, which should be more of an evasive move to avoid taking heavy damage. She should also be quicker and more agile in combat than Yasuke, so I imagine dodging and rapid attacks will be the primary focus with her in combat, which I really like the sound of actually. I've always believed assassins should play like glass cannons in combat, very quick and agile, dealing lots of damage, but being very vulnerable and fragile if they're hit, as they largely prefer to remain in stealth and never wear any heavy armor. However, with most assassins in this series, they end up being combat powerhouses regardless, so I'm hoping with Naoe she can finally be that glass cannon playstyle in combat, where she's very fast and can still do lots of damage, but is at a very high risk when she takes damage herself. And there's been no mention of this yet, but I'm hoping you can still use all of her tools whilst in combat to get the upper hand. And there will be no shields in this game either, as the samurai rarely if ever use them. However, if you're fighting a samurai, they will of course have armor that will have a durability system in combat. So you'll have to break their armor before being able to deal a killing blow, which makes a lot of sense, and will help distinguish the difference in skill between a samurai enemy and a regular bandit. You don't want the samurais to feel as weak as plain old bandits with no armor. I hope we can actually deal visible damage to the armor, seeing pieces break off when attacking a specific area, and hopefully this will address one of my main criticisms of Odyssey's combat, where you have a lot of damage sponge enemies that survive even when you're hitting them with clearly fatal blows.
You call that a fight? You barely winded me.
Some enemies having armor you have to break through does worry me a bit about having the same damage sponge enemies that can just tank a bunch of hits, but hopefully it's not an issue. I'm sure we'll see some combat at Ubisoft Forward, so we'll have an idea of what it's like very soon. Like we heard before, pretty much every prop in the game will be dynamically breakable, with accurate blade marks from whatever weapon we use. I'll definitely test that out when the game comes out. As for weapon types, there will of course be katanas, the kanabo, which we saw in the trailer, yari spears, and the kusarigama, which is a sickle on a chain, which looks awesome. That's probably what I'll want to use with Naoe. And not only that, but each weapon type is going to have its own skill tree, which is definitely new for the series. I imagine you'll be able to improve its stats and get new moves and combos in those skill trees, and the more you use a weapon type, the more proficient you will become with it, which sounds like a similar system to Rise of the Ronin, although there hasn't been any mention of us being able to use different stances with the weapons, like in Rise of the Ronin and Ghost of Tsushima, but I still think having weapon proficiency and weapon skill trees can bring some much needed extra depth to combat. Yasuke can also use rifles, so for the first time since Syndicate, firearms will actually be usable. It doesn't seem like Naoe will be able to use them. Again, I think bringing back the hidden gun for Naoe would be perfect, but it doesn't seem like that'll be an option, or if it is, they just haven't said it yet. Which is a bit of a missed opportunity in my eyes, as the hidden gun was used by assassins at this point in history. Altair invented it back in the early 13th century, and we saw Ezio use it just decades before Shadows is taking place. You'll also be able to craft your own katana in this game, using components and resources you gathered to customize it, along with a full transmog system for all your weapons and gear, so you can look how you want without having to worry about stats, which is always very nice to have. The active combat abilities from Odyssey and Valhalla will also make a return, which you acquire by finding ninja scrolls in the open world, similar to how you acquired them through books of knowledge in Valhalla. There's also a few new details for stealth, on top of things we've already known for a while. For one, there's going to be a new NPC type called Servants. They don't fight, however they can call for reinforcements and sound the alarm, so prioritizing taking out these enemies in stealth should be pretty important, which I really like the sound of. Similar to how Mirage did with the marksmans, I like it because it gives you enemies to prioritize taking out first, because they can be the biggest counter to your stealth run, and have the biggest consequences if they spot you. And these servants will carry lanterns at night, which is rather important because hiding in the darkness is of course going to be a thing in this game, and I imagine the lanterns can illuminate your hiding places. Speaking of which, there's going to be a light meter in the UI to show how hidden you are when in the dark. Again, I fully expect to see what this looks like in the gameplay we get at Ubisoft Forward. In Stealth, we'll also now have the option to knock out enemies for a non-lethal takedown. This was something that was of course possible in the older AC games, and it should enable people to do more pacifist playthroughs if they want to. Although I imagine you're still required to kill the main targets, but I do like that, just giving players more options. I hope there's other non-lethal methods we can use on enemies, but they haven't said sleeping darts would be returning in Shadows yet, so I'm not too sure about that. As we know, the grappling hook will be physics-based, so we can dynamically swing around with it, unlike Syndicate where it would lock you into going a specific direction, and we'll also be able to use it to hide in ceiling spaces inside buildings where you can avoid enemies below. So the grappling hook will probably be more similar to something like Ghost of Tsushima, where you can dynamically swing around in the direction you want. The drone bird will not be in Shadows, which I think is a good thing. I believe a lot of us had gotten pretty tired of the mechanic, and it even felt mostly unnecessary in Mirage and Valhalla since we had Eagle Vision back, which will also be in Shadows so we can spot enemy silhouettes when activated. Enemies will be marked in red, while servants will be marked orange. As I mentioned before, Yasuke will not have a hidden blade, while Naoe of course will, since she's a member of the Brotherhood. Yasuke can still utilize stealth, however he's far slower and makes a lot more noise, even when assassinating people. I would think Yasuke probably uses the Tanto in stealth, like how Jin does in Ghost of Tsushima, since he does not have the hidden blade. But it's good to know that even though Naoe is the stealth-focused character and Yasuke is combat-oriented, you can still build them to be good at both to a certain extent. Even if you try to make a more stealth-oriented Yasuke, he still won't naturally be as strong at it as Naoe, and vice versa for combat. Which is good, because if you could make them equally strong at both, it would eliminate the need to ever play as the other character. And even though I've already said I'll probably mostly play as Naoe, since stealth is my preferred playstyle, it could still be a fun challenge to do stealth with Yasuke too, so I'll definitely play around with that a bit. Now, one of the most intriguing parts about AC Shadows open world are the dynamic seasons the world will go through as we progress through the game, changing the look of the world and even impacting gameplay. In the spring and summer, we'll have bushes and long grass to hide in. In autumn and winter, when those plants die, those spots will no longer be available. However, the seasons should also impact enemy NPC habits. So in the summer, if they've seen you, they'll be active and cut through bushes to look for you, while in the winter, they try to stay around fires and other warm places. So stealth missions will actually be laid out differently based on what season it is, which is one of the most intriguing parts of this game I'm looking forward to, and hopefully we get a demonstration of what this looks like in the gameplay. If done well, this could bring a whole new element to stealth and something else to think about, and it would allow us as players to take advantage of the environment and the weather of the open world. I already mentioned in my previous video how rain, fog, and snow will actually reduce enemy visibility, making it harder for them to detect us, which means it may actually be worth waiting for a storm or something before deciding to start a stealth mission. The viewpoints are returning as well, however they're going to be quite different. Rather than just showing a bunch of icons and places of interest on your map after synchronizing at one of them, you'll get to survey the area and see what the nearby points of interest are without just having icons appear on your map for you to follow. This change is being made in an effort to declutter the map and HUD a bit, to provide for more immersive exploration, and I'm all for this personally. Ubisoft open worlds have become infamous for their overly cluttered HUDs, with all the markers and hand-holding telling you exactly where to go. This is a much needed change to the formula, I think, and will hopefully provide for a more natural feeling exploration experience. Plus, the team at Ubisoft Quebec said rather than focusing on making as big of a world as they can, like they did with Odyssey, they instead wanted to focus on making the scale of the world feel more one-to-one with real life. So we should see a good variety of towns, trading posts, farmland, and castles. There's still been no mention of naval combat or traversal. Perhaps it'll be like Origins and AC3, where there's only naval combat for specific missions, and you can't just get on a big ship in the open world to explore, like Black Flag and Odyssey. I'm sure there will still be some smaller boats we can use though. And I already talked about the quest structure a bit in my previous video, but it's going to be pretty open-ended, revolving around assassinating targets. Some you'll find organically in the open world, while others require more research and intel gathering, and then an infiltration-style mission to reach and assassinate them. The point is to give players more agency and freedom in taking out the targets without telling them exactly what to do or where to go. Hopefully it actually works out well, we'll see though. Overall, I like most of what we've heard so far. I know some are still apprehensive, especially knowing this comes from the same team that made Odyssey, but I think if this game could carry on the strengths of Odyssey while addressing the game's biggest flaws and weaknesses, which to me was always the distinct lack of Assassin's Creed, taking place before the Brotherhood even existed, and missing a lot of key components that make this series what it is, and it seems like this game is addressing those weaknesses. There will actually be assassins and Templars, stealth seems like a major priority. If this game can take the best parts of Odyssey while fixing its biggest issues, there's cause to be optimistic, I think. Of course, we'll learn a lot here at Ubisoft Forward, but so far, everything regarding gameplay in the open world sounds promising, but as always, that's my opinion. What are your current thoughts on AC Shadows and all these details? It really is the year of the samurai though, isn't it? We got Rise of the Ronin, the Ghost of Tsushima PC port, the incredible Shogun TV series that ironically enough takes place in almost the same period as AC Shadows. It's only like 20 years later, I think. So lots of stuff with feudal Japan and the samurai this year, and it's about time. But as always, if you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, I'd appreciate it if you left a like, and consider subscribing to the channel if you're new, and have a great rest of your day, Assassins.